It was the night before the senior prom, and one girl didn't have a dress to wear. She was poor and lived in a section of town where there were many immigrants from Haiti and other islands in the Caribbean Sea. She had gone to the neighborhood funeral parlor that same day to pay her respects to the remains of an elderly neighbor. While she was in the funeral home, she saw a young girl about her age and size lying in a casket in one of the many rooms, which she had entered by mistake. As she looked down at the casket, she noticed that the dress was very pretty and brand new. It had been bought just for the burial. While she was in the room, the funeral director came in and said it was time to close the casket. He sealed it with a big key, kind of like a wrench, and said that the casket would remain closed from then on, and that the burial would take place the next morning. After the director left, the girl went down the hall to the room where her dead neighbor was laid out. While she was in the room paying her respects, she heard a lot of crying and wailing down the hall. Someone had collapsed with grief in one of the rooms, and everyone, including the funeral director, ran down the hall to help that family. As the girl ran by the room with the sealed casket, she had an idea. She went into the room, opened the sealed casket with the huge curved wrench, and quickly slid the white dress off the girl. She put the key back in the socket and the casket lid, and she sealed the lid again. Stuffing the white dress into her school bag, she slipped out past the room where all the crying was coming from. The next night, she put on the dead girl's white dress and went to the dance. As she danced with several different boys she knew, her joints began to get kind of stiff. As time went by, her muscles began to stiffen, and she began to walk and dance awkwardly. She thought maybe there was something wrong with the dress, so she went into the girls' restroom and slipped into a stall. She took off the dress and searched all over it, but couldn't find anything wrong with it, so she put it back on. As she danced, she became colder and stiffer until she was as stiff as a board. The ambulance was called, and she was rushed to a hospital. The doctors pronounced her dead, but she was alive. She could hear every word everyone said and see everything that was happening. She just couldn't move or speak. Soon, she was lying in bed in the same funeral parlor with her family and friends coming by and crying. She tried to move or cry out, but she couldn't. The funeral director came in and closed the lid on her casket. And the next day, the casket was taken to the graveyard, and she could hear the gravediggers working. "Did you hear what happened at the funeral home this morning?" said one of them. "No, what?" said the other as they threw shovels full of dirt onto her casket. A young mortician's assistant heard a knocking sound in one of the caskets. Well, he opened it up, and a young girl in a slit climbed out. She said she'd been the victim of a voodoo ritual. Someone had given her a dress dusted with that zombie powder, so she seemed dead when she wasn't. "Huh," said the first gravedigger. "I wonder what happened to that dress." And then the girl couldn't hear anything else. The trials and tribulations of living in today's modern society can tend to wear on your nerves. One can grow very weary of dealing with bills, taxes, insurance, traffic, and pollution, not to mention anything about keeping food in the refrigerator. Oftentimes, the whole thing can make you want to holler. Throw up both your hands. And that's exactly what old Bill Smith did. He gave up all the luxuries, and if you ask me, some of the necessities of modern life. He loaded up just the barest of essentials and his 3 hunting dogs into his truck and moved way up into the North Georgia mountains. Smitty, that's what all of us folks in town called him. Figured it wouldn't be that much of an adjustment. After all, he did love hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. And he did have the companionship of his 3 best friends, his dogs Ino, and Comptico Calico. What more could a man ask for? Smitty built himself a nice little cabin way back in the woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him. The cabin only had 2 rooms, one of which he used as a bedroom, and the other for every other room: the living room, dining room, den, and kitchen. He had built himself a nice, big fireplace where he could cook his food and warm his body on chilly nights. He planted himself a nice little vegetable garden on the side of the house and would hunt and fish for most of his food. But at least once a month, he would drive the 25 miles down the mountain to the little store to buy those things that he couldn't provide for himself. During the warm months, Smitty had no problem catching as many small game as he needed, but the colder months proved to be a little more difficult to keep his stomach full. Well, it was on one of those cold, wintry nights that Smitty went out to his storage shed to see what he could find for dinner. All he found was a small piece of fatback meat and a handful of rice. There was too much snow on the ground to travel the 25 miles to the store, so he had to make do with what he had. He ate the fatback and a little of the rice, but he gave most of the rice and the water where he had boiled the meat to his dogs. After all, they had to eat too. He called out, "I know, you know, come to go calico, come on doggies and get you some of this Hayab dinner." And those dogs came running in as fast as they could and lapped up all of that rice mixture. Smitty was still a little hungry, but there wasn't much he could do about that. So despite the protests of his grumbling stomach, Smitty stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm, and he went to bed. The sound of the wind blowing around, and in some places through the tiny cabin had almost lulled Smitty to sleep when he heard something. He opened his eyes and saw a shadow on the wall. He eased out of bed and tiptoed into the other room. There he saw the oddest-looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and short, fat feet with long claws, and it had a long, bushy tail. There were no open doors or windows, so Smitty was confused as to how the funny-looking thing had gotten in. Smitty quietly picked up his axe, crept over to the odd critter, who was devouring an insect of some sort, raised his axe, and came down squarely on the creature's tail. Smitty turned to catch the varmint, but he was too quick. It hurriedly escaped through the wall. So Smitty was left standing there with this long, bushy tail and a blood-laden axe in his hand, and no sign of the funny-looking creature. Smitty was about to throw the old tail out the door when his growling stomach reminded him of how hungry he still was. So he took that tail, cleaned it, cooked it with some of the herbs from his garden he had stored away, and ate it. It didn't taste that bad. Why, it kind of tasted like chicken. With his stomach finally full, Smitty got back into his warm, cozy bed. Smitty had just drifted off into a deep sleep when a strange sound awakened him. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin. Perhaps a raccoon. Smitty knew that if he stayed really quiet, it would probably go away. So he stayed as quiet as he could. But then he heard a strange, otherworldly voice, which hissed, "Taily-Po, I want my Taily-Po." Smitty thought the wind was playing tricks on his ears, but he heard it again. "Taily-Po, Taily-Po, I want my Taily-Po." Smitty jumped out of bed, flung open the door, and called out to his dogs, "I know, you know, come to go calico. Come on over, here, and see what's making that noise." The dogs came running, barking, and sniffing around, but they didn't find anything at all. So Smitty put the dogs back outside and went back to bed. Sleep had just eased itself into Smitty's body when he heard the voice again. This time, the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in. But the scratching seemed to be on two walls at one time. Smitty called out, "Hey, hey, hey, who's that at my door? Get on away from Haya." Then he heard the strange voice again, only this time a little louder. "Taily-Po, Taily-Po, I want my Taily-Po. Taily-Po, Taily-Po, I'm coming to get my Taily-Po." Old Smitty, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird, so he eased to the window and called, "I know, you know, come to go calico, come on over, hiya, and see what this is scratching at my house." The three dogs bound up to the porch, and they sniffed around and barked, and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Smitty decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled, wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Smitty woke with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area of the cabin. Smitty searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder, and then the voice said, "Taily-Po, where is my Taily-Po? Give me back my Taily-Po." Smitty yelled back, "Leave me alone. I ain't got your Taily-Po." Then he called, "I know, you know, Comptico Calico, come on in hiya and protect your old master." This time, the dogs didn't come. So he called again, "I know, you know, Comptico Calico, don't you hear me calling you? Come here, doggies." He waited and waited, but still, not one dog came running. Smitty had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching and the voice grew louder and louder and louder. Smitty yelled back as loud as he could, "I ain't got no Taily-Po, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't ever hurt anybody or anything. Just leave me alone." The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening. "Taily-Po, you took my Taily-Po, and now I'm back to get it. Give it to me now." Smitty pulled the cover up over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room. "Taily-Po, you better give me back my Taily-Po." Smitty then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of the bed and onto the cover. Smitty eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching. Then he saw it, a short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws, and bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark, eyes that seemed to burn straight through Smitty. Before he could pull the cover over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest. He looked straight down at him and said, "You got my Taily-Po, and you better give it back to me now." Smitty yelled, "I ate it. I ate your Taily-Po. It's gone." And that thing started to scratch, claw, and tear away at poor old Smitty, trying to get that Taily-Po back. Smitty tried to fight back, but that thing was too strong, and those claws were too sharp. Smitty's screams echoed throughout the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two without hearing from Smitty, the folks who owned the store at the base of the mountain went up to his cabin to make sure everything was all right. When they got there, they found his cabin torn to shreds, but no sign of Smitty or the dogs. They searched the woods and called for them. "Smitty, I know, you know, Comptico Calico." But they never found a thing. As the search party was heading down the mountain, the wintry wind began to blow, and a strange voice could be heard saying, "Taily-Po, Taily-Po. Now I've got my Taily-Po." My Name is Tommy is a short, scary story about a young boy who comes home from school one day and notices something strange about his family. My name is Tommy, and I think I might be going insane. I grew up in a normal middle-class home with loving parents and a sweet little sister. Everything seemed fine until one day, when something very strange happened. I came home from school, and when I walked into the living room, I saw something that disturbed me. My mother and father were sitting on the couch, smiling and staring at the TV. The weird thing was that the TV wasn't on, yet they were staring at it intently. They both turned to look at me and simultaneously said, "Hello, Timmy." My heart leaped up into my throat. My name is Tommy. How could my own parents make a mistake like that? "Is everything ok?" I asked nervously. "Everything is perfect, Timmy," my father replied. They were both smiling from ear to ear. It was creepy. I decided to go upstairs to talk to my little sister. When I walked into her room, she was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling. "Have you noticed anything strange about Mom and Dad?" I asked. She smiled at me and said, "No, Timmy. Mom and Dad are just perfect. My blood suddenly ran cold. My name is Tommy. Without another word, I backed out of the room. She was still smiling at me as I closed the door. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't shake the sneaking suspicion that there was something wrong with my entire family. I went into my bedroom and tried to think. I heard my mother coming up the stairs. She went into her bedroom and closed the door. I decided to spy on her, so I went into the hallway and peeked through her keyhole. What I saw terrified me. My mother was changing clothes. She was standing with her back to me, and I immediately noticed something very shocking. Her skin was very pale, and there was a zipper that ran all the way down her back. Whatever she wasn't my mom. That's when the panic set in. I ran down the stairs and out the front door. As I was dashing down the driveway, I looked back and saw my father at the front door. He was on all fours, growling like an animal, howling, and chasing after me like a raging demon. Since then, I've been on the run. All I can do is keep moving. Now that I know their secret, they can't afford to let me live. I keep moving from place to place, begging on the street for spare change. I tried to go to the police, but they wouldn't believe me. They said I was a runaway and tried to bring me back to my parents. I just narrowly managed to escape. I tried to go to the media, but every reporter I spoke to just laughed in my face. I'm tired of running. I'm pretty sure they killed my real family. My only reason for living now is to get revenge. Can anyone help me? My name is Timmy. The Halloween Mask is a scary story about a boy who wants to impress all his friends with a scary costume at a Halloween party. Things don't work out as planned. There was a boy named Lenny who really loved Halloween. It was his favorite holiday, and he always tried to celebrate it in style. Every year, he would save up his money and buy the best mask, the best costume, and the best decorations. This year was no different. Lenny was getting ready to go to a Halloween party at his friend's house. He got dressed up in a shaggy black coat, big black boots, and a long flowing cape. Then he put on his Halloween mask and admired himself in the mirror. It was the scariest, most hideous mask he had ever seen. He was sure that everyone at the party would be terrified when they set eyes on it. He would be the envy of all his friends. When Lenny showed up at his friend's house, the party was already in full swing. He could hear the dull sound of music coming from behind the door. He rang the doorbell, and his friend answered it. She greeted him and ushered him inside. He looked around the living room. Some people were dancing, and others were talking, laughing, drinking, and nibbling at the buffet. There were witches, ghosts, skeletons, vampires, and zombies. None of the masks were very scary. Lenny was sure he had the best one. He stood there and waited for someone to comment on his mask, but nobody paid any attention to him. He was disappointed. Wandering around the room, he tried to give everyone a good view of the mask. He wanted them to be scared. He wanted to cause a stir. One girl tapped him on the shoulder and started talking to him. "Hey, who are you supposed to be?" she asked. Lenny tried to reply, but he found he couldn't move his mouth. The mask felt too tight. He was embarrassed, so he turned away and went into the kitchen to get himself a glass of Halloween punch. He tried to pull off his mask so he could take a drink, but it wouldn't budge. It seemed to be stuck fast to his face. He pulled and tugged on it, but no matter what he did, he couldn't get it off. Lenny was starting to get worried. It was hot inside the house, and Lenny could feel himself sweating under the mask. He needed to get it off. He needed to get it off now. Grabbing a knife from the kitchen drawer, he went into the toilet and locked the door behind him. He looked in the mirror and started scratching and tearing at the mask, but it really hurt. It was as if the mask was firmly stuck to his skin. Getting desperate, he took the knife as sliced into the mask, cutting off little strips of rubber and tossing them into the sink. Gradually, a queue formed outside the toilet, and people started getting impatient, knocking on the door and calling out, "What's going on in there?" Lenny was in a panic, and he tried peeling off the rest of the mask, but it stubbornly stayed in place. He couldn't understand what was wrong. What if it won't come off? He wondered. What if it's stuck on my face forever? He began hacking at the mask with the knife again and ripping off little bits. More and more people were banging on the door. "Come on," they shouted. "What are you doing in there?" From inside the toilet, they heard Lenny shrieking, "It won't come off. My mask. It won't come off." The people gathered outside the toilet and gave each other worried looks. One of the girls was puzzled. "Mask," she said, but he wasn't wearing a mask. Girls' Night Out is a scary story about two teenage girls named Isobella and Chloe who are stalked by a dangerous murderer. Isobella and Chloe were two typical American teenage girls. After school, they spent all of their time together, watching scary movies, having sleepovers, and shopping for new clothes. They liked partying, keeping up with their friends, having fun, and just enjoying life. They had no way of knowing the horrible fate that life had in store for them. One night, Isobella and Chloe decided to have a girls' night out. They planned to sneak out to a nightclub as soon as their parents went to sleep. Isobella kissed her parents goodnight and went upstairs to bed. When she thought that everyone had gone to sleep, she took out her cell phone, called her friend Chloe, and told her to meet her at the store down the street. Chloe agreed and hung up. Isobella quietly opened her bedroom window, trying not to wake anyone. She stepped out onto the windowsill and climbed down the drainpipe. As she walked down the deserted street, she got a strange feeling that she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck pricked up. She glanced behind her, but she was alone. When she came to the corner store, there was nobody around, so she took out her cell phone and called Chloe. "Look, I'm at the store," she said. "Hurry up, or I'm going home." "What's wrong?" asked Chloe. "I don't know," replied Isobella. "This just doesn't feel like other nights. Something doesn't feel right. I've got a bad vibe." "Stop it. You're just being paranoid," laughed Chloe. "I'll be there in 2 minutes." Isobella hung up the phone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. 5 minutes later, Chloe turned up, and the two girls walked together to the nightclub. The girls were too young to get into the club, but the bouncers never asked them for ID. They strolled inside, and pretty soon they were dancing to the music and flirting with guys on the dance floor. Around 3 a.m., Isobella was chatting with a really cute guy who must have been at least 10 years older than her. Suddenly, she felt her phone vibrating in her pocket. It was a text message from her ex-boyfriend, Anthony. She hadn't heard from him since they broke up a month ago. The text read, "Come outside. I've got a huge surprise for you." Curious, she looked around and saw Chloe busy talking to some other man. So, without saying goodbye, Isobella walked out the door of the nightclub. She had just taken a few steps when she received another text message. It read, "Meet you around the corner over by the dumpster." The street was dimly lit and deserted. Isobella had a bad feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something didn't feel right, but she told herself she was just being overly cautious. Inside the nightclub, Chloe was looking for her friend. After waiting for 15 minutes, she began to grow impatient. She scanned the dance floor, but there was no sign of Isobella. She even checked the toilets, but they were empty. At 3:27 a.m., a relieved Chloe got a text from Isobella. It read, "Meet me outside. Now hurry." When Chloe got outside, she received another text. "I'm around the corner, over by the dumpster. Come watch me sparkle." Chloe followed the directions, crossing the dark and lonely street. When she rounded the corner, she was confronted by a horrific sight. Her heart almost froze in her chest. Isobella was hanging upside down from a streetlight in the parking lot behind the dumpster. Sparkling Christmas tree lights were wrapped around her ankles. There was a large pool of blood below her. Her body was completely stripped of clothing, revealing deep wounds along her stomach and chest. Chloe fell to the ground and began screaming hysterically. Some people who were standing at the door of the nightclub heard her cries and came rushing over. When they turned the corner and saw Isobella's bloody corpse hanging in front of them, they were horrified. The police were called, and they questioned Chloe for hours. Still in a state of hysteria, she could barely talk. Sobbing uncontrollably, she told them how she and Isobella had sneaked out that night and gone to the nightclub together. She tried to remember all of the guys they had talked to and flirted with on the dance floor. They asked her if she knew of anyone who would want to harm Isobella, but she couldn't think of anyone. As much as she wanted to catch Isobella's killer, she was of no help to the investigation. During the interrogation, one of the cops produced a plastic bag and took out a blood-stained envelope. "We found this lodged in your friend's throat. It's addressed to you," said the cop as he handed her the envelope. Chloe was scrawled across the front. With trembling hands, she took out the piece of paper inside and read it. The letter read, "Maybe if you stayed in bed like you were supposed to, things like this wouldn't happen. Don't go sneaking around at night. Bad things can happen." The cops had to grab her before she fainted. An ambulance took Chloe to the hospital, and she was treated for shock. When Chloe returned home the next day, she was still shaken. Her parents told her that Isobella's ex-boyfriend, Anthony, had been arrested for the murder. He was later released after passing a lie detector test. He claimed his phone had been stolen on the day of the murder. The police didn't rule him out as a suspect in the case, but they didn't have enough evidence to charge him. As fate would have it, Isobella's murder would remain unsolved. Nobody was ever brought to trial for the crime. And as time went on, people began to forget about it. 2 years had passed, and Chloe had almost managed to forget about the terrible night when her best friend had been savagely murdered. One night, she called her boyfriend and asked him to meet her at the park. It was about 2 a.m. She began to walk to the park, but felt a strange presence, just like the one Isobella had told her about the night she was murdered. She was almost to the park when the feeling came across her, so she let it go. Her phone beeped. It was a text message from her boyfriend. "Almost there. Baby, love you lots." It made her feel much better. Her last task was to pass by the store. The park was on the other side. She began to walk, but she heard something behind her. Immediately, she began to run. Her boyfriend got to the park and waited for about 15 minutes. At 2:35 a.m., he got a text from Chloe. It read, "Keep walking forward, and you will see me." He did as the text suggested and walked forward. There, hanging upside down from a tree, was the mutilated body of Chloe. Christmas tree lights were wrapped around her ankles, and she was completely naked and covered in blood. He called the police, and he was interrogated all night. The next day, when Chloe's boyfriend got home, there was a letter waiting for him on his parents' doorstep. It was stained with small drops of blood. The note inside read, "Don't go sneaking around at night. Bad things can happen." I wish I could tell you that the murders of Isobella and Chloe were solved, but that's just not the case. Today, the police say the investigation is still ongoing, but they have no new leads. Murders are seldom spoken about nowadays. They were high-profile cases at the time, but due to the strange lack of evidence, people soon forgot about them. Everyone who was involved went on with their lives. You may be wondering how I know so much about these cases. Well, I'd rather not go into it, considering it is still an ongoing investigation. If you must know, I was the cop who was assigned to the case. I was the cop who handed Chloe the blood-stained letter. You may also be wondering why the murders were never solved. Well, like I always say, don't go sneaking around at night. Bad things can happen. The Furry Collar is a scary urban legend about 2 girls named Julia and Geraldine who are having a sleepover. It is based on an old story called The Phantom Footsteps, which is actually a story within a story from The Gentleman from America by Michael Arlen. Julia and Geraldine were best friends, but they had very different personalities. Julia was brave and fearless, while Geraldine was shy and frightened of everything. It was Halloween night, and the girls were having a sleepover at Geraldine's house because her parents were out of town. In fact, every time Geraldine's parents went out of town, they had a sleepover because Geraldine was nervous about sleeping alone in the house, even though she knew there was nothing to be afraid of. It was a big, gloomy house, set way back from the road. When Julia arrived and rang the doorbell, Geraldine answered the door and ushered her inside. The girls changed into their nighties. Julia was wearing a beautiful silk nightgown. It was blood red and had a furry collar. Geraldine thought it was gorgeous and wished she had such a beautiful nightgown. The girls made some popcorn and settled down on the sofa to watch a scary movie. When it was over, Julia was tired and Geraldine was a bit scared, so they decided to turn off the TV and go to bed. As they walked up the stairs, they got the strangest feeling that something was following them. They ran upstairs and slammed the bedroom door. Then they laughed at each other for being so silly. It was shortly after midnight, and the two girls were lying in bed chatting. All of a sudden, they heard a faint noise from down below. It sounded like something was moving around down there. They stopped talking and looked at each other wide-eyed. There was an uneasy silence. Then they heard the noise again. It sounded like fingers scraping down a chalkboard. Julia sat up in bed, listening intently. Geraldine hid her head under the covers. "It's only a cat," Julia whispered. "I'm going down to see." "Don't," Geraldine begged. "Please don't leave me, Julia. Don't be so childish." Julia snapped. "Whenever anything fun happens, you get the shivers down your spine." "Please," Geraldine whined. "If you're so frightened, I'll lock the door from the outside and take the key with me," Julia assured her. "That way, no one can get in. I hope it's a burglar. I'll give him the fright of his life." Julia got out of bed and felt her way to the door in the darkness. She slipped out into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind her. Geraldine listened as she turned the key in the lock. She heard Julia's soft footsteps going down the stairs. Then she heard the noise again. It sounded like a knife being sharpened. Geraldine lay there in the darkness with the bedclothes over her head. She was sick with fear and trying to be as quiet as a mouse. All she could hear was the very stillness of the house. She wanted to call out Julia's name, but she didn't dare. Geraldine waited for what seemed like an eternity. After a long silence, she heard the noise again. It seemed to be moving now, coming up the stairs, getting louder and louder. Scritch, scritch. Then it stopped. Geraldine thought she heard someone standing on the other side of the door. She heard the key turn in the lock, and the door creaked open. "Julia?" she asked. "Julia, is that you?" She couldn't see a thing in the darkness, so she reached out with both hands. She reached out and felt a soft silk nightgown. Then Geraldine reached up higher, and to her relief, she felt the furry collar. It must be Julia, she thought. But when she reached higher again, she felt something wet and warm. There was nothing there. Nothing but a bloody stump where her friend's head had once been. Early the next morning, when Geraldine's mother and father returned home, they were shocked by what they found. Inside the front door, there was a large pool of blood, and a trail of blood drops led up the stairs. The frantic parents rushed upstairs, following the trail of blood that led to their daughter's room. When they opened the door, the poor couple stood there, appalled at the loathsome sight that met their eyes. Julia's headless body was stretched out on the floor. They found Geraldine hiding in the closet. Her hair had gone white, and she was babbling and raving like a lunatic. She had gone completely insane. Later that day, the police found a confused man wandering around the countryside. He was dressed in a white hospital gown, and he had blood all over him. In his hand, he was clunking a bloody knife. It turned out that he was a homicidal lunatic, and just the night before, he had escaped from the local insane asylum. Ironically, it was the very same insane asylum where Geraldine would spend the rest of her life. The Digital Camera is a scary ghost story about a little girl whose mother dies suddenly. She begins to exhibit strange behavior and refuses to be left alone. It is based on a supposedly true story that apparently happened in Japan a few years ago. One of my relatives passed away suddenly. I never met the woman. She had a daughter who was 4 years old. The little girl's name was Yuki. Her father wasn't able to raise her on his own, so he asked my aunt to take care of her. The little girl refused to be left alone and never left my aunt's side. It started to become a problem. My aunt couldn't go anywhere without Yuki. She constantly needed attention. Even my aunt's own daughter started to get jealous. One day, my aunt told me she had to go out of town for a couple of days and asked if I would babysit the little girl for her. I said it would be my pleasure. I lived alone and I could do with some company. A few days later, my aunt dropped Yuki off at my apartment. As she was leaving, she took the little girl aside and said, "Yuki, please be good. Behave yourself." When my aunt was gone, I tried to talk to Yuki and play some games with her, but the little girl's behavior was very strange. She had a teddy bear tucked tightly under her arm and never let go of it. She never smiled. She never spoke. All she ever did was sit quietly in the corner and stare at the wall. It made me kind of uneasy. I was trying to find something that would entertain her. I had just bought a new digital camera, and I decided to let Yuki play with my old one. When she saw the camera, her eyes lit up. I showed her how to use it, and she went around my apartment, taking pictures of everything. There was a bright smile on her face. That evening, I discovered how difficult Yuki was to deal with. Whenever I tried to leave the room, she started crying and screaming out my name. I couldn't leave her alone, or she would create a huge fuss. She even insisted on going to the bathroom with me, which was very embarrassing. At bedtime, she refused to stay in the spare room and insisted on sleeping in my bed. I read her a bedtime story, and after a while, I managed to get her to go to sleep. That was when I noticed her teddy bear. One of its legs was charred and blackened, as if it had been burned. It made me wonder. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a strange noise. When I turned over, I saw that there was something wrong with Yuki. The little girl's body was trembling and shaking. Her eyes were wide open, her teeth were chattering, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. I held her close and asked her what was wrong. "She's looking at me again," she mumbled. "Who is?" I asked in surprise. "The dark woman," replied Yuki. She wouldn't say anything more. I tried to tell her it was just her imagination, but she kept shaking her head and whimpering. It took me a long time to get her to go back to sleep. The next day, Yuki was fine again. She loved playing with my digital camera. When it was time for her to go home, I told her she could keep it. Yuki hugged me. Although she didn't say anything, I could tell she was overjoyed. I dropped the little girl off at my aunt's house and stayed to have a cup of tea. My aunt thanked me for taking care of Yuki, and we spent a while chatting at the kitchen table. "Poor little thing," said my aunt. "She hasn't said a word since her mother died." I couldn't contain my curiosity. "How did Yuki's mom die?" I asked. A strange look came over my aunt's face. "She died in a fire." "How did the fire start?" I asked. "Well," my aunt hesitated, unwilling to talk about it. "It's a very sad story. She committed suicide." Yuki's mother was a very troubled woman. She poured gasoline over herself and lit a match. She burned herself alive. "OMG!" I exclaimed. "How horrible." "Yes," said my aunt. Her family was so shocked, they hushed it up and pretended it was an accident. We had a small funeral, but only close relatives were invited. Yuki wasn't there. She doesn't even know her mother is dead. She thinks her mother is just on a long holiday. We haven't had the heart to tell her the truth." "Poor Yuki," I murmured. My aunt nodded her head sadly. "Poor Yuki." A few days after that, Yuki died. My aunt was trying to change Yuki's behavior. At night, she forced the little girl to sleep in her own bedroom. Even though Yuki screamed and cried, my aunt left her there alone and locked the door. In the morning, she found Yuki lying motionless in bed. The poor little girl was dead. Nobody could understand what had happened. The coroner couldn't determine the cause of death. There wasn't a mark on her body. She was perfectly healthy. She had just mysteriously died during the night. There was no explanation. After the funeral, I went back to my aunt's house. Everyone was very sad. She returned the digital camera I had given to Yuki. I took it home with me. It was something to remember her by. The memory card was full of random photos that Yuki had taken. I browsed through them, wiping a tear from my eye. There were pictures of my apartment, pictures of my aunt's house, pictures of flowers, dogs, toys, candy, etc. Silly pictures that a child would take then. I came to the last picture, and it made my blood run cold. My hands were trembling. I wanted to scream, but nothing would come out. The timestamp on the photo showed that it had been taken on the night Yuki died. Here is the last picture that poor little girl ever took with my digital camera. The Cell Phone is a short, scary horror story about a woman who notices something disturbing on her mobile after she allows her young son to play with it. There was a woman who had a 6-year-old son. One day, she bought a new mobile phone. When she came home from work, she started cooking dinner and left her phone on the kitchen table. Her son came into the kitchen and saw the phone. He asked his mother if he could play with it. She told him that he could, as long as he did not call anyone or delete any text messages. Of course, the boy agreed and went off to his bedroom to play with the phone. Around 10 p.m. that night, she went upstairs to tuck in her son and found him fast asleep on his bed. The new cell phone was lying on the ground beside the bed. She picked it up and began browsing through the settings to make sure he had not deleted anything. She noticed some minor changes. He had changed the theme and background and given her a new ringtone. She noticed that he had taken some pictures with the cell phone. She opened the images folder and browsed through them. How cute, she thought. He had been taking pictures of himself. Then she came across the last photo in the folder. When she first saw it, she couldn't quite believe it. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? It was a photograph of her son lying asleep on her bed. But the disturbing thing was what was lurking in the far left corner of the picture. It seemed to show the left side of a creepy old woman's face. Bobby is a scary story for Halloween about a woman who tries to bring her drowned son back from the dead using black magic. It is based on a segment of an old 1970s horror anthology movie called Dead of Night that was written by Richard Matheson. There was a woman named Susan who lived in an old house on a cliff overlooking the sea. She was divorced from her husband. Susan had been deeply depressed ever since her son Bobby drowned. She was devastated by the loss and felt like she couldn't go on. As time went by, Susan began reading books about black magic and Satanism. The more she read, the more she became immersed in the world of the occult. It was like an addiction. She came across a spell that was supposed to be able to resurrect the dead. One dark night, she drew a pentagram on the floor of her living room. Lighting some black candles, she stood in the middle of the pentagram, and at the stroke of midnight, she read aloud from an ancient satanic book. "Come fulfill my desire and do my bidding in accordance with my will. I conjure thee in the name of Satan, to whom all evil is obedient, by which name the earth is overthrown, the seas turn black, the ground shudders, fire is quenched, and all host of things in heaven and hell do tremble. Lucifer, prince of darkness, return my son, who drowned by accident. Return him to me now. I command thee." Afterwards, Susan blew out the candles. She collapsed to her knees and began to weep. All of a sudden, she heard a faint scratch on her front door. Cautiously, she walked over to the door and listened. The scratching grew louder. "Who's there?" she cried. There was a long silence, and then she heard a voice whisper, "Mommy." Susan opened the door and was shocked to see a small boy crouched on the doorstep. He was soaking wet and shivering with the cold. "Bobby," she cried. "It's you. It's really you." She hurriedly brought him inside and put a towel around him, trying to warm him up. His teeth were chattering and his hands were shaking. "I was so lonely and desolate without you, Bobby," she said. "Where were you? What happened?" "I remember water," he said, "cold water. And I couldn't breathe. I woke up and couldn't remember who I was. I walked and walked in the rain. These people found me, and they took me in. I didn't know if I was alive or dead." "You're alive, Bobby," she cried. "You're really alive." "Was I a good boy, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "Of course you were a good boy," she replied. "Did you love me, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "I do love you," she replied, "from the bottom of my heart." "Were you nice to me, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "Of course I was," she said. Bobby stared at her. It was a mean, angry stare, and there was a spiteful sneer on his face. It frightened Suzanne. "I want to play a game with you, Mommy," he cried. "Hide and seek." All of a sudden, he raced up the stairs. All of the lights in the house went out. "Bobby, what are you doing?" she cried. "Where are you?" There was no answer. "Bobby, stop this," she cried. "I want you to come right back here. Bobby, please don't do this to Mommy. Bobby, for the last time, what are you doing?" Just then, she heard the boy's voice coming from the darkness. "Aren't you glad the lights are out, Mommy?" he said. "It makes the game more fun." "You're going to hurt yourself in the dark," Suzanne replied. Suzanne cautiously walked up the stairs, feeling her way in the darkness. When she got to the top, she looked around, straining her eyes to see. "Bobby, stop this now," she shouted. "You're making Mommy very angry." All of a sudden, the door burst open, and Bobby was standing there, cackling like a maniac. In his hand, he held a long, sharp kitchen knife. "Let's play hide and seek now, Mommy," he shrieked. Suzanne recoiled in horror, backing away. She tripped and went tumbling down the stairs. When she landed at the bottom, she looked up and saw her son coming down the stairs with the knife raised above his head. "You lied, Mommy," he said. "Bobby didn't really drown by accident. You knew that. Bobby drowned himself. He couldn't stand the way you treated him. And he killed himself just to get away from you. Don't you see? Bobby didn't want to come back, Mommy. No, Bobby hates you, Mommy. He didn't want to come back, so he sent me instead." Just then, there was a flash of lightning, and it lit up the house. For one terrible moment, Suzanne saw the face of the thing that had come back instead of Bobby.